Have you ever heard of the Fukushima disaster?
Oh, vaguely. This is definitely not my area of expertise.
I wouldn't know about that.
Okay.
It's something I'm not aware of.
I think one of the things about it is that people don't know enough, and that the Japanese government is very good at keeping things secret from its own people and the rest of the world, actually. So, you know, we don't always know what's going on, and you hear about people being ill.
I know that it's kind of carrying over, and they say it's supposed to be below harmful levels by the time it reaches our coast, but how do you know for sure?
It's all about, you know, doing the research and just looking into these things and asking the questions, because we're not getting it from the mainstream media. A lot of the kind of mainstream scientists are not doing their job and getting out in there and doing this. So it's up to the citizen journalists, it's up to us, the people. If we want to take care and protect this beautiful British Columbia, we have to do the investigating, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We are here on the west coast in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, and joining me on the line right now as I am reporting to you from the sunny climes of BC, we have our good friend James Corbett of thecorbettreport.com joining us live via Skype out of Japan. So James, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Dan.
You know, I'm glad to have you on today because we're covering an incredibly important topic, and you being a journalist who is in Japan, I think have a unique perspective on the issue, and that is Fukushima. So if you can start us off by taking us back to the beginning. What has been going on in the last 3 years, and where does this begin? Take us back to the beginning of the story of Fukushima in 2011.
Well, the story, of course, begins with the earthquake on March 11th that caused the tsunami that ended up in the loss of tens of thousands of lives and an untold amount of destruction that happened in the northeast section of Japan. And of course, part of that destruction was the overrunning of the Fukushima nuclear power plant there in Fukushima Prefecture, on the edge of the ocean, as part of the wave of destruction that rolled across the shores there. And unfortunately, as we all know, this led to the triple meltdown at Fukushima, which has 6 reactors, 2 of which were not functioning at the time. 3 of which completely melted down in the wake of the tsunami. So that was really the disaster itself happening there in March 11th and the days following. However, a subsequent Japanese parliamentary inquiry ultimately concluded that the disaster was in fact man-made, insofar as it was completely preventable. A number of safety mechanisms and other such things that should have been in place, should have been functioning, should have been taken into account before the disaster ever hit, were not basically in place. And this was a result of complete incompetence and cost-cutting and other such things by TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company that owns and operates the Fukushima plant, as well as other nuclear plants and other power grid systems as well here in Japan. So it was a disaster many, many years in the making. And in fact, we have only found out in recent months that, for example, some of the spent fuel the fuel assemblies in the spent fuel pool in reactor 4 were damaged decades before this ever took place. In fact, even going back as far as the 1970s, TEPCO has only now just admitted that fact. So it is a situation that we continue to learn more about. But suffice it to say that it was really in that period in the first week or so after the actual earthquake and tsunami that we started to find out about what was happening at the plant. And it was not until a few months later that they finally admitted that there had been a complete meltdown of reactors 1, 2, and 3.
Unbelievable. I mean, is that because of their ramping up of the propaganda to try to, counter all this information that's going on? I know they've just passed new bills in Japan that would restrict journalists from being able to talk about these things. Is the mainstream media talking about it out there in Japan, or is it up to the independent media to get this issue out there to people?
There obviously has been and continues to be mainstream media coverage of Fukushima here in Japan, although even if we were to assume that the mainstream media coverage was being completely open and honest about the situation at Fukushima, they can only be as open and honest as the information that they're receiving allows them to be. And we know, for example, it has been proven from documents that have come out since the disaster happened that in the immediate wake of the disaster, when the reactor was still leaking radioactive emissions out into the open atmosphere, during that time, there is a Japanese system in place called the SPEEDI system, the SPEEDI system, that is specifically designed to monitor, in the event of nuclear disasters like this one, to monitor the fallout and which way it's going to, and make predictions about which way the fallout is going to fall. And that data was specifically being withheld from the mainstream media here by the Japanese government in those weeks after Fukushima, presumably because they did show that some of the fallout was going directly over Tokyo, and they didn't want to panic the public. So we know that in certain cases the Japanese government has deliberately withheld some of the information about this disaster, and we can only speculate about what other information has been or continues to be withheld from the public about the true extent of what's going on there. So there is mainstream media coverage here. Some of it has been quite insightful and quite getting to the point and really trying to uncover some of it, what's happening there. Others have basically strayed into the realm of nuclear apology and just trying to sweep it all under the rug. So there is a kind of mix of reactions here in the mainstream media. But of course, I think, as you and your listeners probably know, it's the alternative media that's going to be trying to dig up the real dirt, and that's where we've gotten a lot of this information out to the public about the true scale of the cover-up that went on here.
What are your thoughts about the potential of radiation coming on over here to the West Coast? Have you heard of that?
I have. Haven't had many thoughts on it. I've had a few. When it happened right away, it seemed more prevalent, or the thoughts were more prevalent.
I don't know. It kind of died down really quickly, and I think the same thing sort of happened with Haiti and whatnot, where you hear about it for a short spurt of time and then it completely dies out, but the issues are still there, but we just lose track of it, unfortunately, and our lives continue to go on.
You don't get news broadcast in Vancouver. You don't get world news. People here are very insular, and they only know what's going on around about them, not worldwide.
You know, I don't think you can always blame mainstream media for, you know, what it's doing and what it's not doing, but you know, the Japanese has quite a vibrant media, but, you know, if the government's hiding things, and the Japanese government is very good at doing that, hiding things from its own people, and their own people are used to that, so maybe not asking enough questions.
I know that it's kind of carrying over, and you see the time-lapse images of the currents carrying it, and they say it's supposed to be below harmful levels by the time it reaches our coast, but how do you know for sure?
We are now in downtown Vancouver at Stanley Park, currently just about 300 or 400 feet from the coastline by the water here, and I've got a Geiger counter, as you can see in my hand here. We are right now measuring the natural radiation levels up here closer to the grasslands, and I'm currently getting a reading of around 20 counts per minute. Roughly around 18 to 20 is where it's hovering in, which is the kind of natural radiation levels for this area. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the Geiger counter down closer to the water and continue to measure the radiation levels and see if they do in fact rise as we get closer to the seashore. We're about 100 feet closer to the shoreline now. You can see beautiful downtown Vancouver in the skyline behind me. And as you can see, the levels are already slightly different from what we've seen before, now measuring in at around 26, fairly close to what we've seen already back there. But we're going to continue trekking our way down towards water and see if these do in fact continue to rise. So we'll continue to check it out. Again, it's all about doing the research and just looking into these things and asking the questions, because we're not getting it from the mainstream media. A lot of the kind of mainstream scientists are not doing their job and getting out in there and doing this. So it's up to the citizen journalists, it's up to us, the people. If we want to take care and protect this beautiful British Columbia, we have to do the investigating, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's continue our walk down here to the beach. We're here right beside the water, and we're going to take a couple of samples here and see what kind of readings we get. I'll hold it down a little closer to the ground. Now, sometimes the readings coming from the rocks could be picking up radiation levels that have been from inside the rock. That's not necessarily coming from Fukushima. This we don't know yet, but what we do know, as you can see on the numbers here, that they are indeed going up. It is now at 42 counts per minute, which is quite significantly higher than what we've seen, just about 100 feet up the shoreline. Now, whether or not this is radiation coming, natural radiation from the rocks, or if this is radiation from Fukushima is yet to be determined. But the point is, we need to be documenting these things. We need to be figuring it out and keeping track all along the way as we continue to document and do the research that needs to be done in order to figure out, is radiation making its way over here to the West Coast? We're here on the West Coast right now covering this issue, and we're finding similar things with the propaganda we just saw on the front page of the newspaper today. They're saying there's nothing to worry about, people. Don't worry, especially about the seafood that you're eating. Some restaurants are seeing drops in their business, and they're wondering if it's because people are learning about the potential of radiation coming over here. Now, seeing that we're on the West Coast, what can you tell us about the potential of actual radiation from Fukushima making its way to the coastlines here in British Columbia? Is that possible?
It's not only possible, it's already been detected, for example, in bluefin tuna and certain other species of fish. There's been radioactive elements that have been determined to have come from Fukushima that have already found their way into certain fish at levels that are supposedly not harmful to human health. But it's also important to note, of course, that there is no safe level of radioactive radiation. There's no safe dose. Any amount of radiation can increase the likelihood of cancer developing. So that's an important part of all of this to note. However, it's also important to keep in perspective the actual numbers that we're talking about here in terms of radioactive release. And it is still in the theoretical stage at this point because not enough testing has been done. But there have been some tentative papers that have come out recently. For example, just in the last couple of weeks, there's been a paper published in the Journal of Oceanography by a researcher from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute that estimates that somewhere between 4 and 90 petabecquerels of radioactive cesium have been released into the Pacific Ocean as a result of the Fukushima disaster. And somewhere between 15 and 30 petabecquerels is the most likely figure there. And to put that into perspective, that's actually less radioactive cesium than was released into the North Pacific during the period of open atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons back in the 1950s and 60s. In fact, the natural radioactivity of the ocean itself is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 becquerels per cubic meter. And on top of that, there has been a trace that's still detectable to this day that was left by that open atmospheric testing back in the 1950s and 60s. Fukushima is going to add to that, but not in, it seems at this point, from our best estimates, that not in a way that would even exceed what was happening back in that 1950s, 60s open atmospheric testing phase. So there has been some estimates that have been made, but probably the most important part to note is that there is no agency of the U.S. government or the Canadian government, as far as I know, but certainly no agency of the U.S. government that is currently monitoring the radioactivity of the ocean on the West Coast.
Are there things that the individuals can do as well to learn about this? I mean, we've been seeing videos online of people getting Geiger counters and getting their own readings. Is that something that you would encourage? Is there other things that people can do to try to learn more about what's going on and try to dig deep into this issue?
Of course, I wouldn't discourage anyone from taking a Geiger counter and trying to find out what they can. But I would caution that, of course, there's a lot of things that can be learnt from Geiger counters if you know what you're doing and how to use them and what they indicate and what kind of information we can extrapolate from that. So just getting a spot reading of counts per minute, for example, doesn't contain enough information in and of itself to tell us, for example, anything about the source of the radiation, let alone whether or not that radiation is coming at a constant level or if that was just a momentary spike and that sort of thing. There are standards for testing and how this should be done. So preferably, I think people should be, if they are going out there with the Geiger counter, they should know what they're doing and how to use it and what information they can extrapolate from that. But having said that, for people who are interested in this and either aren't there on the West Coast or don't have the resources to do this, one way of keeping track of this is something like the Safecast network, which is a crowdsourced project that was started, I believe, in the wake of the Fukushima disaster. It's at safecast.org, and it provides, well, not live, but constantly updated maps of Geiger counter readings from a number of different sources. Basically, people, individuals, upload their own readings into this Safecast map, and it creates a radioactive terrain map, so you can see how radioactive various spots are. The Safecast network covers Japan that's the most concentrated area of where they're getting their information, but it also includes readings from the United States and I believe from Canada as well. So people can check safecast.org for their maps to find out at least some information about the readings that aren't coming from official government sources if people are concerned about the official government information they're getting.
And James, to your knowledge, in your research into this over the last few years, have you found any correlation or any connection between any kind of a rise in cancer rates and radiation coming from Fukushima? Has that connection been made?
There have been researchers that have claimed that connection, but I think that the methodology that has been used in some of the more well-published of those studies is highly dubious, and I think that there's no way that we could detect the trace of this radiation in terms of cancer rates yet. One would not expect any sort of rise in cancer rates for 3 to 5 years after the accident, so we wouldn't really expect the first increase in cancer incidence as a result of this to really hit until presumably in the next couple of years. And I think that's at the point at which we would start to see this happening. And I think people are right to be wary of the official government statistics on this and the fact that there is not really any thoroughgoing testing programs for this to try to determine if there is going to be an increase in cancer. There are certain programs that are being run in Fukushima, for example, to detect thyroid cancer and that sort of thing. But not a lot of thoroughgoing testing, and certainly not even nationwide here in Japan. So there is, I think, a lot of reason to be skeptical of that. But I think we also have to reserve our skepticism for the other side of the argument, in terms of people who, for example, claim that 14,000 deaths could be attributed directly to the immediate few months after Fukushima, which I think is, again, a highly dubious study with a lot of methodological problems. And I think that goes to really the heart of the problem of this whole issue, is that on the one side, we are expected to believe basically three things about TEPCO. One, that they are being transparent and open and honest about the situation at the Fukushima plant. Two, that they are capable and competent in being able to identify and assess the problems at the plant, and three, that they are actually able to remedy the problems at the plant. And I think there are problems with all three of those assumptions that we've demonstrated and that we could go into at great length. But on the other side of the argument, there's the kind of the alternative media fear-mongering take on all of this, which is simply to, at all times and with 100% certainty, stress every single possible problem as the worst case scenario, and anything that's contradictory to that narrative is generally dismissed. So as an example of that, for example, people have talked recently about starfish melting disease that's taking place off the west coast of Canada and the United States right now. And that received a lot of publicity in the alternative media as being obviously linked to the Fukushima radiation, despite the fact that this melting disease has been identified as early as 2008, so 3 years before Fukushima ever took place. So I think people are starting to jump to unwarranted conclusions, and I think that actually undermines the genuine criticism that we can label and level at TEPCO and the Japanese government for what's going on at the site. I think we shouldn't be trying to muddy the waters by going too far with our assessments, and when genuine progress is made at the site, I think we should make note of that and be honest in our reporting about that as well. For example, the removal of the spent fuel from the spent fuel pool in Reactor 4 has been covered ad nauseum in the alternative media as the potential end of all humanity, but the fact that progress is actually being made in the removal of that fuel has not been reported on, from what I've seen, in the alternative media at all.
Have you come across any information as to ways that people can protect themselves, or are we at a point now where it's purely about mitigation? How can people protect themselves?
I'm of the opinion that avoiding exposure is absolutely the best way to try to mitigate the problem. There are obviously a lot of people claiming a lot of different things about ways to get radiation or to mitigate the risks of radiation in your system. And I'm not a health professional. I'm not giving health advice to anyone. So I would just ask people to be interested but skeptical about all claims and to try to verify them for themselves. And on the note, for example, of the potassium iodide pills that a lot of people are interested in these days. For example, if they go to fairwinds.org, Arne Gunderson has talked about what the actual benefits of these pills are, and the fact that they are very useful in the immediate wake of a reactor meltdown where there is radioactive iodine being released. And in those first few days, that's the crucial period in which potassium iodine pills actually help. Because they basically fill up the thyroid with healthy non-radioactive iodine rather than being uptaking the radioactive iodine that would get into the system after that. That's very important in the few days after a meltdown, but after that point, the effects of it are in fact even potentially hazardous to your health, because taking too much of these potassium iodine pills can have serious side effects. So it is important that people understand the various benefits and drawbacks of these different things that are proposed, and to be skeptical of claims, of magic claims of things that will magically take radiation out of your body. Again, I think avoiding exposure is the number one thing that people can do, and the best way to do that, from my perspective, for example, here in Japan, the way that myself and my family are trying to avoid exposure to the maximum amount possible is that we have stopped eating seafood unless we can specifically determine where it's coming from and determine it's not coming anywhere from the Pacific coast of Japan. And secondly, we are sourcing our food from a cooperative here in Japan that tests all of their food for radioactive for radiation, also uses organic non-GMO ingredients and all of that other healthy stuff. So again, I think that's the way that myself and my family are protecting ourselves at this point. And there are a lot of claims, as I say, out there of different substances and different foods and different things that people can do. Again, I'm not giving particular advice. I just invite people to investigate all of those claims and to investigate the other sides of those arguments. Because again, I think a lot of wild claims can be floated at times like this, and a lot of people are trying to again make money off of people's fear.
And James, where do we go moving forward? Where do you see the future of nuclear power, and is it time to start thinking about other methods?
The time to start thinking about other methods was over half a century ago, unfortunately, when all of this was actually being hardwired into the infrastructure. The only reason that the nuclear power industry exists in the way that it does today is because of the nuclear weapons industry. Basically, the uranium reactors, which have become the standard for the nuclear power industry, are in use specifically and solely because they're very good at making the fuel, the plutonium, for nuclear weapons. And so the link between nuclear power and the nuclear armaments industry is there. It's the reason that these extremely unsafe uranium plants are in existence. if the government, if anyone was actually serious about finding safe ways of using nuclear power, we would be using liquid thorium. Liquid fluoride thorium reactors, which have been tested in limited amounts and in certain ways, but nowhere near the amount of research or money has been thrown into that as has been thrown into the uranium reactors. So is there a possibility of safe nuclear power? Well, yes, if we scrapped completely the way that the nuclear power industry has been developed and went with a completely different technology, yes, it is theoretically possible. Is it likely at this point? Well, not really, because of the hundreds of billions of dollars that have been invested and are continuing to be invested in this unsafe technology. And because it is so completely tied into the nuclear armaments industry, there's no way that governments are ever going to give up their subsidization of the nuclear power industry unless there is a massive tidal wave sea change in public opinion on this issue. And we really need to get people informed about the history of nuclear power, why it developed in the way that it did, and how we can actually hopefully transition off of it in the future to avoid this type of disaster from ever happening again.
Well, this is precisely why it is incredibly important to continue to do this research and continue to document these things so we can, in fact, get to the bottom of this and never have one of these disasters ever happen again. So, James, any final thoughts on you? I mean, you yourself are a Canadian, and I'm reporting from Vancouver, British Columbia now. Any final thoughts in regards to Canadians and how the Fukushima might be affecting people on the West Coast?
Well, I would just once again invite everyone to be skeptical. Be skeptical of what I'm saying. Be skeptical of what the government is saying. Be skeptical of what the alternative media is saying. Be skeptical of what the mainstream media is saying. And from that position of skepticism, then you can weigh various claims against other claims. You can go to the source data from which people are making their claims, and you can determine whether or not they're being honest with you. And that's the only way to come to any sort of understanding of what's happening and what the real risks are. And it's not an easy process to sort through all that information. I'm doing my best to try to make that information available at FukushimaUpdate.com, where I'm trying to have a mix of mainstream and alternative coverage that tends towards the alarmist side of the debate, as well as coverage that tends the other way, so that people can sort through that information for themselves and come to their own decisions. But again, I think skepticism is the bedrock at which we have to start from in order to start examining the issue. Because if we come at it with any sort of preconception one way or the other, then we're probably only going to find information that confirms our biases. So I hope people will continue to press the Canadian government to begin and to continue monitoring, not only on the West Coast, but throughout Canada, and not only because of Fukushima, but because of all of the other potential sources of radioactivity that exist in North America right now. Not only the Canadian nuclear sites, for example, there's nuclear processing facilities in Toronto and other places that people generally don't even know exist, and these are all potential sources of radioactive contamination. So I think people should be aware of radioactivity generally, not just in terms of Fukushima, and hopefully through a greater understanding of that, we can also have a greater understanding of how this is affecting our environment and what we can do to mitigate these problems.
Very well said. Thank you once again, James, for speaking with us today. We'll have links in the description for people who can learn more from James on his site, Fukushima Update. Once again, thank you very much, James. Take care. Stay safe out there.
Thank you, and you stay safe as well.